Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 8 of the Dog Trainers Podcast. We are going to be discussing a podcast done by Stuff You Should Know. It's by Chuck Bryant, Josh Clark, and they talk about dog training. So let's dive in.
Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend. Episode 8, our commentary on iHeartRadio's podcast, Stuff You Should Know. Their episode is entitled How Dog Training Works. What's up, everybody? My name is Brent, and that guy is Mariano, and welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. This is episode 8, and we have a special treat for you guys. We are actually commenting for the very first time on another person's podcast that we listen to. Now, the podcast in question is called Stuff You Should Know. The episode is called How Dog Training Works. One of my clients actually sent this over to me and said, Brent, what are your thoughts on this? And I actually love the podcast so much. I actually just wanted to give my 2 cents in, and I sent it over to Mariano to see what he thought about it. So Mariano, did you get a chance to listen to the podcast yet?
Yeah, I checked it out. I listened to it a couple times. It was definitely, it's enjoyable. I can see why these guys are big. Because I know that they do the Stuff You Should Know isn't like a dog training podcast. They do all kinds of different topics. And this episode just happened to be on dog training and their thoughts on it, the way that they framed the different methodologies. And there's definitely some stuff that I liked a lot. There's a few things that I kind of took issue with and I wanted to dive into them. So I figured I'd let you start with that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would agree. I think, these guys are not professional dog trainers. However, they love their dogs, and it's super obvious when you hear them talk and you hear the little anecdotes. They have great personalities, but at the same time, they don't know what professional dog trainers know, right? So pretty much what the point of what we got from the whole podcast is that the podcast was comparing a very commonly polarized view of dog training, right? So people, they're talking about what they call the dominant movement in dog training, and then the positive reinforcement. Right now, as dog trainers, we deal with this dichotomy all the time. We deal with, are you dominant or are you positive reinforcement, right? The funny thing, and this is the biggest thing we're trying to teach as many people as possible, is it's not black and white in dog training. Right. There is so many different, I wouldn't say it's gray. I would say there's so many different colors in between black and white that exist within the dog training world. But unfortunately, the way the media, marketing, all that stuff kind of frames it, it constantly puts what they call dominant dog training up against what they would consider the positive reinforcement movement. And can't blame them. This is pop culture. This is the media. Unfortunately, what I realize is we know as much about dog training as we know about health, right? So what I mean by that is everything we know about health is something that was taught to us by marketing. So if I were to ask someone super simply, like, what's the key to fitness? They would say, like, eat right and
Exercise.
Eat right and exercise, and you'll be fit. Right. But then why are we so worried about the vitamins? Why are we so worried about the supplements? Why are we so worried about the meal preps? Why are we so worried about the right workout equipment? Why are we so worried about all this? So what happens is marketing, when people want to sell something, they tend to overcomplicate it to make you feel that you need this. And the sad part about dog training is that that's all we know about dog training, right? So we know what we're told. And unfortunately, we only know the population knows what's ever been on TV, right? That's what we know of dog training. So if there was a show on it, we know about it. If there was a show that showed the opposite side of it, right? Then we know about that method and those ideologies, right? So unfortunately, we only know what we see on TV. And this is the downside to dog training as it is to health.
Can I just say really quick, because it was on like the tip of my tongue, and I'm sure it was to everybody listening. It felt when you were talking about dog training, like black and white, it almost felt like you were specifically avoiding using the term 50 Shades of Grey because I was thinking about it. And it almost felt passive aggressive because I wanted you to say it. I'm kidding. Oh, also, one more thing. Sorry.
Well, you just like 50 Shades of Grey. I get it.
One more thing. Sorry.
The reason I didn't want to say gray is because gray does not provoke the right idea, right? There's different colors, right? Different ideas, different places we start, different personalities of dogs. The same way to say that a dog is light gray in their training needs light gray training method is not what I was going for. So anyway, go ahead.
Got it. Oh, no, sorry. Just last thing. It's dumb, but again, it was on the tip of my tongue and it'll haunt me if I don't. So this is our first time talking about, another podcast as a response. So other people's podcast, OPP, boom, suck it. Please continue.
Got it. OPP. Yeah, you know me. All right. So here we go. We kind of broke this up into 3 sections. The first section, they really break down what they would consider to be the 2 opposing forces, right? So they brought up what dominant dog training is and what positive reinforcement dog training is. And in this first section, yes, they try their best to stay neutral, but very quickly into the podcast, we start seeing that they obviously choose sides, right? And here's the funny thing: there are no sides to be chosen right now. So to put it simply, if you guys get a chance to listen, it is a very good podcast. I listened to some of the other episodes also. Very well put together. I love these personalities. However, when it comes to dog training, what our specialty is, we're gonna talk about a couple buzzwords. We're gonna break down a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of these things. And if you guys want to hear what they say, listen to the podcast. And then go ahead and listen to our podcast right after, and then you'll be able to kind of have a broader understanding and education of what's going on. Okay.
Right.
So let's see. Positive reinforcement. Dominant. So they talk about dominance dog training a lot. So dominance dog training, it's been around for a while. What would you say your definition of dominance? Like, let's talk about the cultural definition of dominant dog training, and then we'll get into some explanations.
Okay. So I'll give you my definition. We'll get into some explanations. And then I want to make a quick point right now in the beginning before we proceed. Mm-hmm. So dominance in the cultural kind of pop culture, like normally understood sense, is someone or something who is kind of above you for whatever reason. They're either smarter than you, stronger than you, faster than you. Right. And so to be dominant over your dog, people assume a sort of like forcefulness to the way that you go about like forcing your dog to submit to certain things.
It's kind of a bit of a tyrannical stance.
Right.
Got it. Sorry, continue. Go ahead.
That's okay. So if we talk about an example, are we talking about an example of here, I'll do it like this. An example.
Some of the examples that they talked about.
Okay, perfect. So an example that they talked about things like hitting your dog, kicking your dog, the alpha roll, like when you flop your dog over to the side and kind of hold them down to the ground. And they were framing these all in what was the other one? The muzzle grab that we grab the dog's like jowls and
the scruff shake or the
scruff shake. Yeah. And there was one with the mouth. Either way, so these were certain examples that they were giving, and they were using verbiage like you suppress the dog and it could be effective.
You break their spirit.
Right. You break their spirit. So essentially it was kind of like, it'll get you results, but at what cost is how they made it sound. So the point that I wanted to make really quick, and then I'll let you continue, is when we talk about it sounded like they did try to be neutral to an extent, but even if they have, a stance that they align with more, that's fine. The problem is they presented a very realistic idea of positive reinforcement with a very cartoonish / outdated, if it ever was dated, idea of dominance. And the problem with this is that means the entire premise of this 45-minute podcast is like askew. So they're putting up a false flag there of like, oh, don't do this horrible thing, do this clearly better thing. But in the more balanced training category, there is a better thing too. So you have to compare apples to apples. So go ahead.
Right. And I wouldn't say necessarily, I don't think necessarily they were educating people on things that they didn't already think. I think they were just kind of reiterating what pop culture already is on dog training. So let us go ahead and fill in those gaps. One big thing that they talked about is they talked about how the dominance training methods, ideas all came from a really early observation of wolf behavior in captivity, which is totally true. The number one thing that we do, I mean, this has been debunked now for like 15, 20 years. We know scientifically this is the case. However, again, we only know what we've seen on TV. So Cesar Millan brought back this idea of leadership and dominance and, asserting yourself and all these things. So now it culturally, it seems like a new idea, but this has been debunked for 20, 30 years now. Right. So what they were trying to say is that wolves lived in this militant hierarchy, alpha, beta, omega, all this stuff. And that's how our families and everything should be structured. And that's how that's how dog families are structured. And that's how we should, in essence, belittle our dogs and make them feel less than. And these types of theories and ideas, they don't really exist in the context that they were explaining. They do for people who don't spend a lot of time with dogs or only know dogs on the surface level. But in the dog training culture right now, it does exist out there still. There are some people who solely believe in that because it's the simple way of looking at things. But when you're more balanced dog trainers like me and Mariano, we really have to look at things in a broader spectrum. So, however, I just want to be clear, dominance dog training has been debunked. However, the need for leadership, for structure, for routines, and giving your dog both desirable and undesirable feedback for their behavior while they're learning and you're raising them, that is never argued in dog training.
Right. And I just wanted to be clear with, I'm not denying the existence of dominant dog training. What I'm getting at is to suggest that it's a mainstream ideology today is just not true. It's fringe at best. So positive, like pure positive, is huge, super mainstream. A lot of the biggest dog trainers I can name off the top of my head right now are like pure positive people. But balanced, kind of more nuanced, more modern dog training that is positive, but also does use corrections and other forms of aversives. That's really the other side of the coin right now. Not like full on dominance from however many years ago where you like roll the dog over and kick it.
Right. Exactly. So now over the years, right, the word dominance has had a really bad connotation with society. But in dog training, it comes up all the time, right? So as teachers, what we have to do is we have to actually really define to what we mean if the word dominance ever comes up, what we actually mean as balanced dog trainers. And so definitely no slamming, no pinning, no yelling, no aggression, no pain should be involved in the raising of your dog, right? However, that doesn't mean that sometimes we may not have to physically control our dogs, mentally control our dogs, or emotionally control our dogs, right? So what this means is dominance, simply put, is our physical, mental, and emotional influence over another creature. Right. So, for example, if we look at physical dominance, let's look at child raising. Let's say you have a 3 or 4-year-old kid who sees a bunny on the other side of the street, and all of a sudden your 3 or 4-year-old kid decides to go, "Ooh, bunny," and runs across. I'm not necessarily going to call my kid back, with a treat or a candy bar. I'm not necessarily going to click my kid to get him to come over here. What we have to do in that moment is we have to physically take action to stop my kid from running into the middle of the street, right? Especially if my kid is fixated on the bunny rabbit, right? Because they think it's so cute because they watched Bugs Bunny when they were a kid, when they at home, right? So the idea of physical influence, of being able to physically stop your dog from doing something, physically grab your dog, sometimes have to restrain our dogs if they're being aggressive. That is always going to be a part of dominance, influence, whatever it is, right? We're going to refer to dominance as influence. So we need to be able to physically control our dogs, number one. Okay. Number two, when we're talking about mental influence, what we're talking about determination. We're talking about willfulness. We're talking about persistence. We're talking about all these great qualities that we love in human nature, and in sports and in all the competitive things, but we, for some reason, hate it when we're talking about our four-legged friends, right? So mental dominance is about determination, right? So many times what we see in the animal world, especially with domesticated dogs, how is it that my little cat can control my giant Rottweiler? Or how is it that the smallest Chihuahua is in control of 3 pit bulls? right? It's because it has nothing to do necessarily with physical dominance, right? And we see this amongst domesticated animals. What it has to do with how that animal thinks. So mental influence, mental dominance, whatever you want to refer to it, is also part of it, right? If you think of our parents, my mother's 4'11", and she can look at me and my two brothers, and she can strike fear in our hearts. And did our mom beat us and kick us and do all those things? No. No, she didn't, but she can definitely get inside of our heads. Okay. And then the third part is going to be emotional influence. So giving emotional context to things, how a dog should feel, or how letting a dog know how we feel about a situation so that they can react to it. So all these three influences, physical, mental, and emotional, these are all part of this general idea of dominance, but it's never going to be taught to people like that, because it just took me about 10 minutes or 5 minutes to explain to you guys dominance. This is the modern interpretation of what it is, right? Dominance exists between a relationship, but dominance doesn't mean be mean, tough, aggressive, any of those things. It just means influence over something else. And so our job is definitely to have influence over our dogs.
Right.